Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Joining us now from the Rattle and Hum Sports website, the Big 12 insider, Kevin Lonnquist. Kevin, how you doing?
I'm good, Bryan. How are you doing today?
Doing very well. Thanks for being on with us, as always, on Fridays. On Wednesday night, Big 12 Commissioner Bob Bowlesby told reporters that the Big 12 is probably going to ask the NCAA for a waiver that would allow the league to host a Big 12 championship game, even though there are only 10 teams in the league. Do you think they're actually going to go for a championship game, or is this just something to kind of keep the lines of communication and the doors open in case they expand some more?
I think there's a little bit of both to it, but I don't see if you're the Big 12 why you wouldn't pursue it and see what kind of traction you can get out of it. I would find it hard to believe too that if they did push forward with this, why they wouldn't grant it? As I'd mentioned in our website, that if the NCAA is, and I realize that this is kind of apples and oranges here, but if the NCAA was granting waivers to bowl teams that went 6 and 7, like Georgia Tech this year, which lost in the ACC championship game, I don't see why they wouldn't grant the waiver on this if the conference pursues it. Of course, I think the conference will look seriously into it. I mean, wouldn't have brought this up for discussion if they really weren't serious about doing this. The only thing that I would caution here is the conference had a pretty successful first week of December. They've been doing this the last 2 years with the 10 teams in it, insofar as where you had 3 games on December 1st. You had more games than any other conference that weekend because that was championship weekend. You had the 3 games with Oklahoma State at Baylor, Texas at Kansas State, and Oklahoma at TCU, all which had some impact in it from the standpoint of Baylor was on a roll and finished with its a long deserved win over Oklahoma State. Kansas State beating Texas to pretty much wrap up its BCS berth. And then you have Oklahoma winning a thriller against TCU and what it claimed to be a share of the conference championship, which I think that might be another reason why the conference is looking at this, because I don't think like the fact that you had a co-championship where the one loss by Oklahoma was by the team that's going on to the BCS. And I think that might have, I think maybe 20 years, Bryan, 20 years ago, we're talking about where, conference champions were okay, but we're now in an age where it's, if you're not first, you're last. And I don't think they like to have that situation pop up again.
So you think by not having the championship game, it may have cost Oklahoma a spot in the BCS?
I think obviously Northern Illinois' run up the chain, and with the fact that you had some other factors that led into it, with Texas and Nebraska losing that final week as well, that really helped Northern Illinois' case. But I also think too that the Big 12, we're the conference that was all set to get those at large BCS berths, and with the fact that didn't work out for them, I think that really put them in a difficult spot. Now the question is, if they do get it granted and they do put all the particulars together, how are they going to do it? Are we going to have one hosting 2 on the home team's field? Or are we going to go neutral site, a la likely at Cowboy Stadium? And then here's the other thing too, Bryan. If they don't expand and keep it at 10, and you're going to have potentially 3 teams or more with the same conference record, how are you going to divide up the tiebreakers to determine that? Because regardless of how you even come up with that format, someone's going to be pretty sore about the way it turns out.
Oh, no question. The other thing that they talked about some was trying to get some kind of an alliance with the ACC for football, I guess. This, in addition to already having this Big 12 SEC championship game, I'm kind of lost on what the appeal is of trying to hook up with the ACC here, other than TV markets, which I'm sure drives everything.
Well, I think it's also a case, too, where maybe the ACC does it so it doesn't get rated either by other conferences. And there's been a lot of talk about the fact that the Big Ten has been looking at Georgia Tech, Virginia, North Carolina, and maybe an alliance between the Big 12 and the ACC with some potential games in September involving maybe 4 or 6 teams could probably keep the ACC more solidified than weaken it. Obviously, and again, the ACC came up in discussion more out of deductive reasoning because of the conferences that probably are on the weakest of the 5. And I think that's where the ACC comes into this discussion. I also suggested, too, that if it were to go this far, in addition to the Champions Bowl between the Big 12 and the SEC, that if they kept this alliance and this thing grew, you may have a championship game in December between the Big 12 champion and the ACC champion for whatever reason. Again, I just threw that out there for a talking point more than anything else. But if you're going to do it, things have changed so much over the last 2 years anyway. I don't see why they wouldn't even bring that up for discussion if they ever get an alliance formed with the ACC.
And I'll throw one other thought out there. How much of this has to do with the fact that Notre Dame is now aligned with the ACC to a degree?
I think that makes a good point. I think you hit something there from the standpoint that the Irish are going to play about 5 conference teams in the ACC with this new agreement as they move in there. And of course, the Big 12 has always wanted to have some sort of relationship with Notre Dame. And there's always been the talk about the Texas Athletic Director DeLoss Dodds and Notre Dame Athletic Director Jack Swarbrick being really good friends, and how they thought that at one point maybe Notre Dame would join the Big 12 in every sport but football, and then that fell through. So maybe this is a way to kind of get the Irish into that rotation with the Big 12 if this relationship ever gets done. And again, we've got miles to go before this is even formatted, if it ever gets that far.
Okay, and then we talked last week about Kansas and the 9 Herbs in basketball, but Phil Steele released his projected AP preseason top 10 for 2013 in football, and there's not one team from the Big 12 in the top 10, and he says this could be the worst group of Big 12 title contenders in the preseason in the league's history. What are you making of that, and do you agree?
Yes, I do agree, because there's a lot of questions surrounding each of these teams. Texas, still a lot of issues with them as far as on the defensive end and with their offensive line, and can David Ash be more consistent as a quarterback? OU's going to be looking at a new quarterback situation there. Oklahoma State was basically a turnstile for quarterbacks last year. You look at Kansas State has a quarterback. And see, if you're looking at the top teams in the conference, everybody has a quarterback issue. Texas, we're not sold on Ash, as I just mentioned. OU's got it. Oklahoma State's got it. Baylor's got it. Kansas State has got it. And TCU really has it as well, with Casey Paulhill now back in the mix. And so there's just not that kind of stability. Every team in this conference has an issue at the signal caller position. I think if there was more stability with that, with the guy who touches the ball the most, I think the conference would have a better perception of it right now.
Okay, now let's talk about the Big One and the 9 Herbs. As far as the basketball conference is concerned, I want to ask you first of all, how much damage was done by Oklahoma beating Baylor the other night, as far as Baylor's position is concerned?
Well, I think it didn't hurt Baylor too much just yet. Baylor's got a big game at Iowa State tomorrow night, and then Oklahoma. And again, this is typical Lon Kruger, like we talked about last week. Bryan, he just does a great job wherever he goes. That first year, they're kind of middle of the road. They aren't a real sexy looking program, and then that second year, they kind of just take off. They kind of come out of nowhere because they're much of an afterthought, and then they just kind of picking up these big wins. And they've got a big game at home tomorrow night against Kansas State, and they've also got KU coming to their building too. And so I think that you really put itself in a pretty good position. I think even as far as Baylor is concerned, I don't think the Bears are hurt too much just yet, because I think they've had some quality wins. They've got a good record. They're 5-2 in the league. Even if they were to lose at Iowa State tomorrow night, which is not an easy place to play, that I still think they're in pretty good shape. I think if Baylor were to not finish at 500 in the conference, then I think they'd have an issue. But I don't foresee that. I think they've already swept TCU. They should take care of Texas Tech. They got Tech coming back to their place. They'll probably win in Austin. They'll have a challenging game, obviously, up in Norman, and they got to go to Stillwater still, and then they'll have Iowa State at their place. So I think that there's some things that Baylor is in still control of its destiny as far as the NCAA tournament is concerned, since we are talking February 1st.
Yeah, if you're calling a pecking order right now, would you say Kansas State?
I just put out my power rankings that will actually be released. I just put them together, I should say, and they'll be out later on Friday afternoon. I have Kansas 1, and I moved OU ahead of K-State, just because I think the Sooners are playing a little bit better, despite the fact that they both have 5-2 records. But I think the Sooners are playing a little better. Kansas State's kind of come back a little bit here, even though I realize that their 2 losses are to Kansas and at Iowa State. But I think that OU's got a little momentum. I watched OU a lot against Kansas last week, and I thought the Sooners, even though they were kind of kept at arm's distance by the Seahawks, they never really were out of that game. If they just could have put a couple of quality possessions together, they could have made Kansas sweat a little bit more. But then I have Kansas State third, and then I have Baylor, then Oklahoma State, and Iowa State my top 6, and then we have the real other herbs down at the bottom. So,
ooh, and Texas, bringing up the basement there.
Yeah, it's just a nightmare season out there in Austin, and I don't see it getting better. In fact, you can pretty much, since they're now under 500, I think you can see their postseason hopes in any capacity go by the boards. I wouldn't think that they would. Even if we were to get to 500 or maybe get to like a 16 or 14 and 16 record, we've seen where the CIT and the CBI basketball tournaments have taken teams with sub 500 records because they like the home venue and the chance to make some money off of it. But I think Texas is too proud of a program that if it went in that direction, that it would ever accept anything like that.
Interesting. Okay. And finally, Super Bowl. You keeping up with this?
I am, and I like one of the Harbaughs to win it.
Way to go out on a limb there, buddy.
Exactly. Well, you really want my prediction here. I really got it. I really nailed the Cotton Bowl and the BCS.
I want them all, man, because I went out there. I laid it out there, too. So, I want to hear what you got to say.
Well, if we're going to go down, then let's just go down and think all the way.
Why not?
Exactly. I can hit the trifecta here. Actually, I kind of like the Ravens in this game.
So you're going with the hot team instead of probably the better overall team.
I know. I don't even so much. Baltimore is hot. There's no question, but they're not a bad team. Joe Flacco's a really good quarterback, and he does a great job of running that offense. I know that there's been a lot of attention, deservedly so, toward Colin Kaepernick and the way that he runs the zone read. He's arguably one of the fastest quarterbacks I've ever seen play the game at the professional level. But there's just something about the way Flacco's playing that I think that he'll manage the game and do a great job, make some big plays. I think I heard a stat where he has the most passing attempts this year of any NFL quarterback of 20 or more. So he can deep play if you want, and I'll match Ray Rice against Frank Gore.
Okay.
I think Ray Rice is just one of those. He's a great player. He's a guy that can make a difference. I think back to the great 4th down conversion he had at San Diego that really helped the Ravens pull out that win. And that's not to take anything away from Frank Gore, but I kind of like Ray Rice just a tad bit more. And I think the Ravens are enough of a veteran locker room to kind of put this whole issue with Ray Lewis and the banned substance that he supposedly used to kind of make that a non-issue. It was early enough in the week so that if a story broke, today, that might be a problem. But the fact that it came out, I believe, on Tuesday, some time will have passed and the Ravens can focus on what they need to do. I think Baltimore wins the game something like 27-21.
Okay, very good. And I mentioned yesterday on my show the thing I would most like to see on Sunday would be when they introduce the teams and they run out on the field. I would love to see all the Baltimore Ravens players running out on the field wearing deer antlers.
Well, you really do go for the jugular, don't you?
I think it would be great. It would be a great motivational tactic. And besides, where can I get some of that stuff? If it works that good, I want it.
I mean, what do these people think of next in terms of in these labs about, yeah, deer antlers, yeah, there's got to be something there that causes those things to take off, and let's see if that works. I mean, that's not even on my radar, nor should it be, but it's just amazing how people who are trying to get an edge, what they will think of and where their minds work.
And not only that, but the minds of the people who come up with the idea for deer antler spray in the first place, because that's akin to snake oil.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, where did this guy come from? And he's certainly not running away from it. In fact, I think he's called a news conference in New Orleans today so that he can, talk more about this wonder product that he's got there. So he's certainly not trying to, disavow from these players. That's for sure.
No question about it. It's just like I said, it's very interesting to see how this all kind of unfolds, and like I said, how these people will think about what can they look at It's just amazing how Bambi can help you get better.
Bambi is the secret, no question about it. Bambi makes Ray Lewis crazy. That's what it is.
Exactly. You know what, Brian? It all goes back to Bambi, doesn't it?
I love it. I love it. Hey, Kevin, thanks very much for coming on with us as always.
All right, sounds good, Brian. You have a great weekend and enjoy the Super Bowl Sunday.
You do too, buddy. Thank you. Kevin Lonnquist, the Big 12 insider from Rattle and Hum Sports on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.